My name is Anna, and this is the story of how I was cast aside by the people who were supposed to love me most, my family. Growing up, I always thought family was everything. You know, the kind of bond that holds you together through thick and thin, the people who'd have your back no matter what. That's what I believed, at least, until the day I realized I was invisible to them. My parents, my brother, they chose him over me every single time. But let me start from the beginning so you can understand why my heart still aches when I think about those days and why I fought so hard to build a life from nothing. I was born in a small town, the kind where everyone knows your business and the streets are lined with old houses that creak in the wind. My parents weren't rich, but we got by. Dad worked as a mechanic, always coming home with grease stains on his hands and a tired smile. Mom was a part-time cashier at the local grocery store, always humming some old tune while she cooked dinner. They weren't perfect, but they were my world. And then there was my younger brother, Liam. He was 3 years younger than me, with bright blue eyes and a laugh that could make anyone smile. Everyone loved Liam. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Me, I was just Anna, the quiet one, the one who got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and never asked for much. Even as a kid, I could feel the difference in how they treated us. When I was 7 and Liam was 4, I remember saving up my allowance for weeks to buy Mom a cheap little necklace for her birthday. It was nothing fancy, just a shiny trinket from the dollar store, but I was so proud of it. I wrapped it in tissue paper and gave it to her with the biggest smile. She patted my head, said, "Oh, that's sweet, Anna," and tucked it away in a drawer. I never saw her wear it. That same day, Liam drew her a picture, a messy scribble of a house with a lopsided sun. Mom cried, hugged him, and hung it on the fridge like it was a masterpiece. I didn't understand it then, but that moment stuck with me. It was the first time I felt like I was competing for their love and losing. As we grew older, the favoritism became impossible to ignore. Liam got new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs from cousins. He got a shiny new bike for his 10th birthday. I got a used one that squeaked every time I pedaled. When I aced my math tests, Dad would nod and say, "Good job, Anna." When Liam scored a goal in soccer, the whole family would cheer like he'd won the World Cup. I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself it was because Liam was younger, or because he was a boy, or because he was just special. I loved him too, you know. He was my little brother, always tagging along, asking me to help him with his homework or play games in the backyard. I'd do anything for him, even if it meant swallowing the hurt of being second best. By the time I was in high school, I'd learned to keep my head down and focus on what I could control. School was my escape. I was good at it, really good. I loved books, science, numbers, anything that let me lose myself in a world where effort mattered more than charm. My teachers noticed. They'd pull me aside, tell me I had potential, that I could go to college, maybe even get a scholarship. The idea lit something up inside me. College meant a way out, a chance to build something for myself. I started dreaming of a life beyond our small town, where I could be more than Liam's sister. But dreaming was one thing. Making it happen was another. My parents didn't have money for college, and I knew they wouldn't take out loans for me. They'd already started a savings account for Liam's future, even though he was only a freshman and spent most of his time playing video games. I overheard them talking about it once, how they wanted to make sure Liam could follow his dreams. I remember standing in the hallway, my heart sinking, wondering what my dreams were worth to them. Nothing, apparently. I wasn't about to give up, though. I got a part-time job at a diner after school, waiting tables for tips that barely covered my bus fare. Every penny I earned went into a shoebox under my bed. I called it my freedom fund. I worked late nights, studied during breaks, and kept my grades up. It was exhausting, but it felt good to have a plan, to know I was working towards something. I'd lay awake at night, imagining myself walking across a stage in a cap and gown, my parents finally seeing me for who I was. maybe then they'd be proud. Maybe then they'd realize I was worth something. Things started to shift when I was 17. I had applied for a scholarship to a state university, one that would cover almost everything: tuition, books, even housing. It was my golden ticket. I spent weeks on the application, writing essays, getting recommendation letters, triple-checking every detail. When I got the interview call, I was over the moon. I told my parents at dinner, my voice shaking with excitement. "If I get this, I can go to college for free," I said, waiting for their reaction. Mom looked up from her plate, her fork paused midair. "That's nice, Anna," she said, then went back to eating. Dad didn't even look up. "Just don't get your hopes up," he muttered. "Those things are hard to get." I felt like I'd been slapped. I wanted to scream, to ask why they couldn't just be happy for me, but I didn't. I just nodded and cleared my plate. That same day, Liam got picked for the varsity soccer team, and the house turned into a celebration. Mom baked his favorite chocolate cake, Dad bought him new cleats, and they invited half the neighborhood over to cheer for him. I sat in my room, staring at my scholarship application, feeling like I was shrinking. The interview went better than I could have hoped. The panel loved my story. A small-town girl with big dreams, working hard to make it on her own. They asked about my family, and I lied. I said they supported me, that they believed in me. It felt easier than admitting the truth. A few weeks later, the letter came. I'd won the scholarship, full ride. I ran home, clutching the envelope, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I burst into the living room where Mom and Dad were watching TV. "I got it," I said, waving the letter. "The scholarship! I'm going to college." Mom smiled, but it was thin, like she was trying to remember why this mattered. She said, "That's great, honey." Then Dad glanced at the letter, then back at the TV. "Good for you," he said, his voice flat. "Just make sure you're back for Liam's game this weekend. He's starting." I stood there, the letter trembling in my hands. I wanted to cry, to yell, to throw something, but I didn't. I went to my room, shut the door, and sat on my bed staring at the words on the page. "Congratulations, Anna. We're proud to welcome you." The university was proud of me. My teachers were proud of me. But my family? They didn't care. That night, I made a promise to myself. I was going to prove them wrong. Not just my parents, but everyone who ever looked past me. I'd go to college, build a life, and show them what I was capable of. I didn't know then how much it would cost me, or how far I'd have to go to keep that promise. But as I packed my bags for college, leaving behind the house where I'd always been second best, I felt a spark of something new. Not just hope, but determination. They could choose Liam all they wanted. I was going to choose myself. Leaving home for college felt like stepping into a new world, one where I could finally be Anna. Not just Liam's sister, not the overlooked daughter, but me. The university was a few hours away from my small town, a sprawling campus with red brick buildings and students who seemed to know exactly where they were going. I didn't. I arrived with one suitcase, my scholarship letter, and a heart full of equal parts hope and fear. But I was ready to work, to prove I belonged here, and to build something for myself. What I didn't expect was how hard it would be, or how my family's shadow would follow me, even miles away. The first few weeks were a blur. I was studying biology, a field I'd fallen in love with in high school because it made sense of the world in a way nothing else did. Cells, systems, life, it was all connected, predictable, fair, unlike my family. My scholarship covered tuition and housing, but everything else, books, food, clothes, was on me. My freedom fund from the diner was running low, so I got a job at the campus library. It wasn't glamorous, shelving books and scanning IDs, but it paid enough to keep me afloat. I'd work late, study until midnight, and wake up at 6 for classes. Exhaustion became my new normal, but I didn't care. Every step felt like a brick in the foundation of a new life. I made a few friends, too, though I kept most people at arm's length. There was Mia, a bubbly art major who'd drag me to coffee shops, and Sam, a quiet guy from my biology class who'd share his notes when I missed something. They were kind, but I struggled to open up. Growing up invisible had taught me to guard myself, to expect disappointment. Still, they'd tease me about my workaholic ways, saying I was too serious for an 18-year-old. Maybe they were right, but I couldn't afford to relax, not when I was carrying the weight of proving everyone wrong. Back home, things were different. I'd call Mom every Sunday, hoping to hear some warmth in her voice, some sign that she missed me. But our conversations were short, clipped. "How's school?" she'd ask, and before I could answer, she'd pivot to Liam. "Your brother scored 2 goals last week," or "Liam's applying to colleges now, you know." I'd grit my teeth, say, "That's great," and hang up feeling smaller than when I'd called. Dad was even worse. He rarely picked up. When he did, it was to remind me not to waste my scholarship or to ask if I was coming home for Liam's games. I stopped calling as often. It hurt too much. Then came the first big blow. It was winter of my freshman year, and I'd been invited to a research program, a prestigious one that could lead to internships, maybe even a career in biotech. The catch was, it required a small fee for materials, about $500, and I didn't have it. My freedom fund was down to $20, and the library job barely covered ramen and bus fare. I swallowed my pride and called home. I explained the program, how it could change my life, how I just needed a little help. Mom listened quietly, then said, "Anna, you know we're saving for Liam's college. We can't afford it right now." I pressed, my voice shaking. "It's just $500, Mom. I'll pay you back. This could be my future." There was a long pause, and then she said, "We'll talk to your father." A week later, Dad called. "We can't do it, Anna," he said, not even bothering to soften it. "Liam's got a soccer camp this summer, and it's expensive. You'll figure something out. You always do." I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat on my dorm bed, staring at the wall, feeling like I'd been punched. They had money for Liam's camp, probably thousands, but not 500 for me. I cried that night, the kind of sobs that leave you hollow. But by morning, I was done feeling sorry for myself. If they wouldn't help me, I'd find a way. I started tutoring high school kids in math and science, squeezing sessions between classes and library shifts. It was grueling, but by spring, I'd scraped together the $500. I got into the research program, and it was everything I'd hoped for. I worked under a professor who saw my potential, who pushed me to think bigger. By the end of the program, I'd co-authored a small paper on cellular regeneration. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt like I was building something real, something no one could take away. Sophomore year brought more challenges. My course load got heavier, and the library job wasn't enough anymore. I took on a second job, waitressing at a campus cafe, where the tips were better, but the hours were brutal. I'd smile through rude customers, memorize orders, and study flashcards between shifts. My grades stayed high, but my body was breaking down. I got sick a lot. Colds, fevers, exhaustion that wouldn't quit. One night, I collapsed in my dorm, burning with fever, barely able to move. Mia found me and dragged me to the campus clinic. The doctor said I had pneumonia and needed rest. Rest? I didn't have time for that. But I had no choice. I called home, hoping for something. Comfort, maybe. Mom answered, and I told her I was sick, that I was scared. Her voice was distant. "Oh, honey, that's awful. Make sure you drink lots of water." Then, before sending to Liam, "Did you hear? Liam got accepted to that fancy engineering school." I could hear Dad in the background shouting, "That's my boy!" I mumbled, "That's great," and hung up feeling smaller than when I'd called. I recovered, but it took weeks. Those weeks were lonely, but they hardened me. I stopped expecting my family to care. I focused on school, on my research, on my jobs. By junior year, I'd caught the attention of a biotech startup visiting campus. They offered me an internship, paid, thank God. It was my first taste of the real world, the kind of work I dreamed of. I was analyzing data, running experiments, learning from people who treated me like I mattered. They liked my work ethic, my ideas. At the end of the internship, they offered me a part-time role I could balance with school. It wasn't much money, but it was enough to quit the cafe. For the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. Senior year was when things started to shift. I was graduating soon, top of the class, with a job offer from the biotech company. They saw potential in me, wanted me to lead projects, maybe even climb the ranks one day. I was thrilled, but there was a part of me that still ached for my family's approval. I invited them to my graduation, hoping they'd come, hoping they'd see what I'd built from nothing. Mom said they'd try, but Liam had a soccer tournament that weekend. "It's a big deal for him," she said. "You understand, right?" I did. I understood too well. I walked across that stage alone, my cap and gown feeling heavier than they should. My friends cheered. Mia and Sam were louder than anyone, but the seats where my family should have been were empty. I didn't cry. I'd learned by then that tears didn't change anything. Instead, I looked out at the crowd and made another promise to myself. I was done chasing their love. I'd build a life so big, so undeniable, they'd have to see me. And when they did, I'd be the one choosing who got to stay in it. Graduating college was supposed to be the finish line, the moment where I could finally breathe and say, I did it. But it wasn't. It was just the start of a new kind of fight, one where the stakes were higher and the wounds cut deeper. I'd built myself up from nothing, clawing my way through college with no help from my family. Now I was stepping into the real world, and I was determined to make it mine. But just when I thought I'd left the past behind, my family came crashing back into my life, proving that some betrayals don't just sting, they burn everything to the ground. After graduation, I moved to the city where the biotech company that hired me was based. It was a big step, leaving the small-town girl behind for a tiny apartment with peeling paint and noisy neighbors. But I loved it. The job was everything I dreamed of. Challenging, fast-paced, meaningful. I was working on projects that could change lives, like developing new treatments for diseases that had no cure. My team respected me, my boss mentored me, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I was 22, and I was finally starting to see the shape of the life I'd promised myself. The money wasn't bad either. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to pay my rent, buy groceries without checking my bank balance, and even save a little. I started investing too, small amounts at first, in companies I researched obsessively. I'd always been good with numbers, and I learned in college that the stock market wasn't just for rich people. It was a game of patience and strategy, and I was good at both. Over the next few years, those investments grew. Not enough to make me rich, but enough to give me a safety net. I felt proud, like every dollar was proof I didn't need anyone to lean on. I hadn't spoken to my family much since graduation. I'd send Mom a text on holidays, maybe call on her birthday, but it was always the same. Short, polite, and all about Liam. He was in college now too, studying engineering at the fancy school my parents had saved up for. They'd call him our future star, while I was just doing okay in their eyes. I stopped trying to correct them. It wasn't worth the energy. I had my own life now, and I was focused on building it bigger, better, stronger. By the time I was 25, things started to take off. My company promoted me to lead a research team, and I was spearheading a project that got attention, big attention. We were developing a new drug that could slow the progression of a rare disease, and the early trials were promising. Investors started noticing, and so did the media. My name was in articles, my face on the company website. I wasn't famous, but I was someone. I bought a better apartment, started dressing in clothes that didn't come from thrift stores, and my investments were growing faster than I'd expected. I wasn't a millionaire yet, but I was on my way. Then, out of nowhere, my family called. Not just mom or dad, both of them, on speakerphone, their voices bright and eager in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Anna, we're so proud of you," Mom said, and I froze, my phone pressed to my ear. Proud? Since when? Dad chimed in. "We saw you in that article. You're doing big things, huh?" I mumbled something, unsure what to say. They asked to visit, said they wanted to catch up. I should have known better, but a part of me, that little girl who'd saved up for a dollar store necklace, wanted to believe they meant it. I invited them to my apartment, my heart a mix of hope and dread. They showed up on a Saturday, Mom and Dad with Liam in tow. He was taller now, 22, with the same charming smile that had always won everyone over. They hugged me, said my place was nice, and sat on my couch like they belonged there. For a moment, it felt good, like maybe we could be a family again. We talked about my job, the project, the articles. Mom kept saying, "Our Anna, a big shot," and Dad nodded along, grinning. Liam was quieter, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Then it came. Over dinner, Dad cleared his throat. "Anna, we've been thinking. Liam's got this opportunity, a startup he wants to launch. It's engineering stuff, real cutting edge, but he needs funding to get it off the ground." My stomach twisted. I knew where this was going. Mom jumped in, her voice sweet. "We thought, since you're doing so well, you could help him out. Maybe invest in his company. It's a family thing, you know?" Liam finally spoke, his tone casual but practiced. "Yeah, Anna, it's a sure thing. I just need a little capital, maybe 50 grand to start." $50,000. I stared at them, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. They weren't here to reconnect. They weren't proud of me. They wanted my money for Liam. Always Liam. I felt the old hurt flare up, but this time it was mixed with something new. Rage. I put my fork down, my hands trembling. You haven't called me in years," I said, my voice low. "You didn't come to my graduation, you didn't care when I was sick, and now you're here asking for $50,000? Mom's face fell, but Dad leaned forward, his voice firm. "Anna, don't be selfish. Liam's got a real shot here. You're doing fine. You can afford it." Liam nodded, like it was obvious. "Come on, Anna, it's not like you need all that money. Help me out and we'll all win." I looked at them, my parents, my brother, sitting in my home acting like I owed them something. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking but steady. Mom gasped. "Anna, what?" I cut her off. "You don't get to walk in here and act like you care about me just to ask for money. I've been on my own since I was 17. I don't owe you anything." Dad's face hardened. "You're ungrateful," he said. "We raised you, and this is how you treat us?" Liam smirked, like I was being dramatic. "Chill, Anna. It's just business." I didn't back down. I pointed to the door. "Leave. Now." They argued, pleaded, then finally left, Mom crying, Dad muttering about my attitude, Liam rolling his eyes. When the door shut, I sank to the floor, my heart pounding. I'd spent years hoping they'd see me, love me, and now I knew the truth. They only saw what I could give them. The little girl inside me broke that night, but the woman I'd become stood taller. The next day, I made a decision. I was done with them. I blocked their numbers, deleted their emails, and focused on my life. My project at work became my obsession. We pushed harder, worked longer, and by the time I was 27, the drug we'd developed was approved. The company's stake skyrocketed, and so did my investments. I wasn't just comfortable anymore, I was wealthy. Not billionaire wealthy, but enough to buy a house, a car, a life I'd never dared dream of as a kid. I'd done it all on my own, and that felt better than any apology they could have offered. But they weren't done with me. A year later, I got a letter. Not an email, an actual letter, hand-delivered to my office. It was from Mom, begging me to meet them. Liam's startup had failed, she said. They were in debt, struggling, and they needed me. "Your family," she wrote. "Please, Anna, help us." I held the letter, my hands steady now. I thought about the years I'd begged for their love, their attention. I thought about the $500 they wouldn't give me, the graduation they skipped, the nights I cried alone. And then I made my choice, the one that would change everything.
The letter from my mom sat on my desk for days, its edges curling slightly from the humidity in my office. Her words, "Your family, Anna, please help us," echoed in my head, stirring up a storm of emotions I thought I'd buried. I was 28 now, living a life I'd built from scratch, a life my family had no part in. I had a corner office, a team that respected me, and enough money to never worry about scraping by again. But that letter brought it all back. The years of being invisible, the sting of their betrayal, the night I kicked them out of my apartment. I'd told myself I was done with them, but here they were, creeping back into my world, asking for help I knew they didn't deserve. This was the moment I had to decide who I was going to be and what I was willing to let go of. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Every time I picked up the letter, my chest tightened with a mix of anger and something softer, something I hated admitting was still there. Guilt. A part of me, that small, desperate part that still remembered being a kid who loved her family, wondered if I was being too harsh. They were struggling after all. Liam's startup had crashed, leaving them in debt. Maybe they'd changed. Maybe they were sorry. But then I'd remember Dad's voice calling me selfish, Liam's smirk when he asked for 50 grand, Mom's silence when I needed her most. No, they hadn't changed. They just needed something from me again. I threw myself into work to avoid thinking about it. My team was scaling up production for the drug we'd developed, and the company was expanding, opening new labs and hiring more staff. I was in meetings with investors, presenting at conferences, shaking hands with people who called me inspiring. It felt good, but it wasn't enough to drown out the noise in my head. At night, alone in my house, a sleek, modern place with big windows and a view of the city, I'd sit with a glass of wine, staring at that letter, wondering what to do. I wasn't the scared teenager who'd begged for their approval anymore, but I wasn't heartless either. I needed to figure out how to close this chapter for good. One evening, I called Mia, my friend from college who'd stuck by me through everything. She was an artist now, living across the country, but we still talked regularly. I told her about the letter, about my family's debt, about the way they'd waltzed back into my life like nothing had happened. Mia listened, her voice calm but firm. "Anna, they've never been there for you, not once. Why do you think they're here now? It's not love, it's money." I knew she was right, but hearing it out loud made it real. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. She didn't hesitate. "Protect yourself. You've built this life without them. Don't let them take it from you." Her words stayed with me. I started digging into what was going on with my family. I had the resources now. Contacts, money, access, so I hired a private investigator to look into Liam's failed startup. It didn't take long to get answers. The investigator sent me a report. Liam's company had been a mess from the start. He'd taken out loans, spent recklessly on fancy offices and marketing, but had no real product. Worse, my parents had co-signed those loans, putting their house up as collateral. They were drowning in debt, facing foreclosure, and Liam was nowhere near the future star they'd painted him as. He was still living at home, coasting on their support, blaming everyone but himself for the failure. Reading the report, I felt a strange mix of pity and fury. Pity for my parents, who'd bet everything on Liam and lost. Fury because they never bet on me, not even a little. I thought about the $500 they wouldn't give me for my research program, the graduation they skipped for Liam's soccer tournament. They chose him every time, and now they were paying the price. But why should I pay it too? I sat with that question for days, weighing my options. I could help them, pay off their debts, save their house. It would be easy for me now. But every time I considered it, I saw Liam smirk, heard Dad's, "You're ungrateful," felt the weight of years spent begging for scraps of their love. I decided to meet them one last time, not because I wanted to help, but because I needed to face them, to see if they'd changed, to know for sure what I was walking away from. I agreed to meet at a coffee shop in my city, neutral ground. When I walked in, they were already there. Mom, Dad, and Liam, sitting at a corner table. Mom looked older, her hair grayer, her eyes tired. Dad's shoulders were slumped, his usual gruffness softened by defeat. Liam looked the same, cocky, like the world owed him something. I sat down, my hands steady, my face calm. I'd practiced this moment in my head 100 times. "Anna, you look so successful," Mom said, her smile nervous. Dad nodded, his eyes flicking to my expensive coat, my watch. Liam leaned back, arms crossed, watching me like a puzzle he couldn't solve. I didn't waste time. "You said you needed help. Tell me what's going on." They spilled it all. Liam's failed startup, the loans, the house they were about to lose. Mom's voice cracked as she talked about how hard it had been. Dad added, "We just need a little help to get back on our feet." Liam chimed in, "I've got a new idea, Anna. It's a sure thing this time. If you invest." I cut him off. "No." The word came out sharper than I meant it, but I didn't take it back. They stared at me, stunned. I took a breath, my voice steady now. "I know about your startup, Liam. I know you blew through the money, made bad calls, and dragged Mom and Dad down with you. And now you're here asking me to fix it. Why should I?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Anna, we're family. We're struggling. Don't you care?" That word, family, hit me like a slap. I leaned forward, my voice low but clear. "Where were you when I was struggling? When I was sick? When I needed you? You chose Liam every time. You don't get to call me family now that you need money." Dad's face reddened. "You're still holding grudges after everything we did for you?" I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "What did you do for me, Dad? Tell me. Because I remember working 2 jobs to pay for college while you saved for Liam's future. I remember begging for $500 you wouldn't give me. I remember you missing my graduation for his soccer game." Liam rolled his eyes. "Come on, Anna, don't make this a soap opera. Just help us out. You've got the cash." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same entitled kid who always gotten everything. "No," I said again. "I'm done." Mom started crying, Dad started arguing, but I was already standing, my chair scraping the floor. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to see if you'd changed. You haven't. Don't contact me again." I walked out, their voices fading behind me. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. For the first time, I felt free, not just from them, but from the part of me that always hoped they'd love me. Back at my office, I made a plan. I wasn't just going to cut them off, I was going to make sure they could never touch what I'd built. I met with a lawyer, set up trust to protect my assets, and started looking at my future, not just as a scientist, but as someone could build something even bigger. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing my path, and it didn't include them.
Walking out of that coffee shop, leaving my family behind, felt like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. I was 28, and for the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, their neglect, or their demands. I'd faced them, said what I needed to say, and closed the door on a past that had held me back for too long. But freedom didn't mean the story was over. It meant I could finally write the ending I wanted, one where I wasn't defined by their choices, but by my own. This is how I rebuilt my life, not just to survive, but to thrive, and how I made sure they'd never touch what I'd created. The weeks after that meeting were quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels empty. It was peaceful, like the calm after a storm. I threw myself into my work with a clarity I hadn't had before. My company was growing, and so was my role in it. The drug we developed was now on the market, saving lives, and I was leading new projects, pushing boundaries in biotech that even I hadn't dared dream of a decade ago. My team looked to me for guidance, and I found myself mentoring younger scientists, people who reminded me of the girl I'd been, hungry, determined, overlooked. I made sure they knew they were seen, that their work mattered. It was healing, in a way, to give others what I'd never had. Financially, I was in a place I'd never imagined. My investments had grown steadily, and with the company's success, I'd earned bonuses and stock options that pushed my net worth into the millions. I wasn't flashy about it. I didn't need a mansion or a private jet, but I bought a house I loved, a quiet place with a garden where I could sit and think. I traveled too, not to escape, but to see the world I'd worked so hard to be part of. I went to conferences in Europe, took vacations with Mia in places like Bali and Iceland, and started collecting art, small pieces that spoke to me. It wasn't about showing off, it was about living a life that felt full, one I'd earned. But the past has a way of lingering, doesn't it? A few months after the coffee shop, I got an email from an unknown address. It was Liam. He'd found a way past my block numbers, probably through one of his friends. The email was long, rambling, and dripping with the charm he'd always used to get his way. He apologized, sort of. He said he was sorry for how things went down, but quickly pivoted to how hard things were for him, how mom and dad were barely hanging on, and how they'd lost the house. He didn't ask for money outright, but it was there, between the lines. If you could just help us get back on our feet, Anna, I know we could make things right. I read it once, then deleted it. I didn't need to. That chapter was closed. I did, however, keep tabs on them, not out of sentiment, but to protect myself. My lawyer had advised me to stay informed in case they tried anything desperate. Through my investigator, I learned they'd moved into a small apartment, scraping by on dad's mechanic work and mom's part-time job. Liam was working odd jobs, still chasing big ideas that never panned out. They were surviving, but just barely. A part of me felt a pang of sadness, not for them, but for the family we could have been. I let it pass. I'd spent too many years grieving what never was. Instead, I focused on building something new. I started a foundation, a small one at first, to fund scholarships for kids like me, ones from small towns with big dreams and no one to back them. I called it the Horizon Fund, a name that felt like hope, like looking forward. I worked with local schools, setting up programs to help students with college applications, mentoring them through the process I'd navigated alone. The first time I handed a scholarship check to a shy 17-year-old girl, her eyes wide with disbelief, I saw myself in her. I told her, "You're enough. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." She hugged me, and I had to blink back tears. This, I realized, was what I'd been working toward. Not just success, but purpose. My personal life started to open up too. I'd always kept people at a distance, afraid of being hurt again, but I was learning to trust. Mia introduced me to her friend group, and I found myself laughing at dinner parties, going on hikes, even trying online dating. I met a guy named Ethan, a quiet architect with a kind smile and a knack for listening. He didn't push, didn't pry, but when I finally told him about my family, he just held my hand and said, "You're incredible for everything you've done." It wasn't love yet, but it was something warm, something real. For the first time, I felt like I could let someone in without losing myself. By the time I turned 30, I was at peace. Not the fragile kind that breaks under pressure, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are. My company went public, and my wealth grew to a point where I could have retired if I wanted to. But I didn't. I loved my work, my team, the way we were changing lives. I expanded the Horizon Fund, reaching more students, and started speaking at events, sharing my story. Not the painful parts, but the part about starting from nothing and refusing to give up. People called me an inspiration, but I didn't feel like one. I was just Anna, doing what I had to do. One day, I got a call from my investigator. My parents had tried to contact a lawyer, looking into whether they could claim a share of my wealth. They'd heard about my company's ITO, seen my name in the news again. The lawyer shut them down. My trusts and assets were ironclad, but it was a reminder of who they were. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt, like a bruise you forget until you press it. I told my investigator to keep monitoring them, but I didn't want details anymore. I was done letting their choices define my life. I made one final decision: to sell everything tied to my old life. I'd kept a few things from my childhood: a photo album, a scarf Mom had knitted, and a book Dad had given me when I was 10. They were small, sentimental, but they anchored me to a past I no longer needed. I donated most of it, sold the rest, and used the money to fund another scholarship. It felt like cutting the last thread connecting me to them. I didn't hate them, not anymore. I just didn't need them. I had my own family now, not one bound by blood, but by choice. Mia, Ethan, my team, the kids I helped through the Horizon Fund. As I sit here now, looking out from the city from my garden, I feel something I never thought I would. Gratitude. Not for my family's betrayal, but for what it taught me. It forced me to stand on my own, to fight for myself, and to build a life that's mine. I'm not the girl who cried in her dorm room, begging for love that never came. I'm Anna, the woman who chose herself, who turned pain into power, and who's writing her own story. And this story, it's just beginning.